morning, everybody. I'm Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosa, and welcome to the Victoria Real Estate Show for July 11th. I'm here with...
Oh my God, look at that energy you have this morning. Okay, everybody. Hi, it's Andrew Plank with LePage and the Vibe Real Estate Group. I feel like I have to bring up the energy here. That was an amazing introduction, Jane.
Thank you. I've been working on it. Practicing. Practicing.
Okay,
Put on
good.
lipstick for today as well.
Let's not overwhelm our huge audience.
All right, so today we're going to do a little market update. Then we're going to talk about the new rules that have come out again regarding being an owner. And I forgot to put in one, which was obviously the increase in the capital gains tax. And
yeah, but we'll concentrate on rentals today.
Yeah, we're going to do provincial rules. So let's start with the shoe. All right. So it is July 11th. We're talking about new tenancy rules, how selling a rental has become more onerous. So first of all, if you do like this show, please like us. Don't forget to subscribe. We're on YouTube on each of our channels, and comment about what you know and like about the show. And please don't forget to share to somebody who may be of interest. Okay.
Also comment about what you don't like about the show so we can do things to improve it. But we do appreciate your positive comments, of course. All right. Okay. So taking it away, it is July 11th, and we've had 340 properties go live on market in the last week. We've had 146 properties pending, and we've had 172 price decreases. So still lots of stuff happening in the marketplace where people are definitely making changes and moving things around here. 4 increases in price, 7 back on market, 133 transacted, 46 expired, and 2 withdrawn. So compared to the week before, we certainly have way more listings. You want to go through this one, Jane, or shall I?
Well, we've gone from 52% the previous week to 47% in listed sales. And I will say that in talking with other realtors, like for instance, right now, Souk is really suffering. So this is market dependent on your neighborhood and what's happening. And like for instance, out there's a lot of construction. So different areas will have different impacts on this. But what I don't think we need to go into big detail. The solds are all happening the previous week because we were at end of month, and now we're heading into mid-month. We're going to see more next week as we head into the actual middle. So month to date stats, we're at 134 for July so far, 2024. That's compared to 595 for the whole of July for last year. And we're at...
That's about on par.
Yeah. We'll see. New listings for the month so far as of Monday were 338. That's compared to 1,125 for July of 2023. And last month we were at 1,496 new listings. So, wow, that's more than we had in COVID for whole months for total listings. Active listings were at 3,395, and that's up from last year at 2,419, and we're a little bit down from last month. So last month we were at 3,460. So we're down a little wee bit.
In the active listings. Yeah, that's an interesting sign then. I mean, I'm certainly, again, I am making showing requests after and finding many of the properties that I'm being asked to show are already under contract. And so that's an interesting thing for me, despite, again, the fact that, sure, Souk and the outlying areas may be slower. There's definitely some really hot segments of the market right now.
Yeah. Where's the hottest segment, do you think?
Well, again, so houses under $1 million, of course. right? And then I would say anything in the core, because with all of this selection, you've got people with more choice. They're gonna choose the core. They often the people who were choosing to go further afield because they couldn't find what they were looking for closer to home are now choosing to stay closer to the core because they can both a maybe find more affordable and b find more selection. But condos, even West Shore condos, but especially in town, those I know traditionally have been really slow, but there's definitely certain price points where those, and again, in the starter price points, still really, really hot.
It's funny, I had somebody who called me, they gave me a referral for looking at a condo downtown. So we were looking at Dockside Green, and this
Hmm.
was a sure thing. And then they started to look around, they realized like, oh, if I just go a little further afield, if I go to the townhomes on Dunsmuir for the same price, I'm going to get 3 bedrooms and parking right in my unit, and I can walk to downtown. If I go to Langford, and they were just like, you could see them expanding their horizons, which is why I say to clients when I'm working with them, like, let's just start wide, then we can narrow. But some people, they listen to people who live and work here who have, I would say, a prejudice against certain areas.
Maybe blinders. Yeah.
Yeah. And who are like, oh, yeah, I never live in the West Shore. It's terrible. Whereas, you know, I
I
find
think it's really important to know your client and understand what they're looking for, and then you can help to counsel them on a fit. Um, but yeah, there's so many pros and cons of each area, including, for me, and I may have said this before, but for me, Oak Bay has always felt like it's a place a lot of people want to live. And yet for me, someone who works all throughout Victoria, I find I get caught in areas like Oak Bay or James Bay. If I lived there, I'd find it really hard for me to go out and do business in the West Shore. Somebody calls me and says, "Hey, I'd like a showing out that way." I have to navigate an extra 15, 20 minutes just to get out of those areas to get out there.
yeah.
So yeah, it's all dependent on, and so even areas that are really popular may not be a fit for you.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's funny, like with my old show, Vancouver Island Time, when you talk to people about areas, they'd be like, "Oh, I live in the perfect area of Victoria, wherever they live. It's 20 minutes everywhere." And that's,
Yeah, yeah.
but yes, agreed. And we are affected by where we grow up. So having come from another city, I grew up in Toronto. I see how gentrification happened in Toronto. So areas that were previously kind of downtrodden have turned around, and I'm seeing that in Victoria. I think the only thing we're missing is good public transportation. So,
Transport, yeah, public transit. So it was interesting. I just want to circle back to that thing you were saying about, you tell your clients to start wide and to narrow down. And I've had lots of conversations recently with my business partner as we are developing out our service models and so forth. And one of the things I found in the past is it can be hard sometimes with clients who they filter for the exception as opposed to, they don't filter on what they want, they filter on what they don't want,
huh,
or they're trying to, yeah. And that can be really hard because then they're eliminating, it's a process of elimination. Let's see everything possible on the MLS and then decide which of those we don't want. And then what remains is what we want. And that can be really hard to work with. So there's conversations happening with clients like that. But do you find um, that approach of trying to look at everything, that works to begin with as you're getting to know the market, but after a while you have to focus.
I think it depends. So yes, and those tend to be what I call high knowledge clients who are really interested in just doing the research. And um, I think you would attract a client like that because that is your personality as well. You're very research oriented. One of the brightest guys I know, honestly. And yeah, you are. And those people are afraid of making the wrong decision rather than focused on making the right decision. So
Mhm.
they want to know about everything, and they go, and their question is the best one coming? Am I going to miss it? I have to look at everything out there just in case I don't find it. So
Yeah.
I have to make sure. I have lots of clients like that, and so what I find helps is when you're working with them as a realtor is really listening to their talk and their feedback during showing so that you understand what their needs and wants are, because sometimes what they think is a need is just a want. And they, like, for instance, one of my first clients, she wanted a character home, and we went and looked at um, all these character homes. And then one day we're looking at this really modern zebra home, and I'm standing there in the kitchen, and I'm like, why are we here?
Mhm.
And she's like, well, I just wanted to see. Sometimes they need to just knock it off the list, right? Which is what you're saying. And I'm,
Yes.
this is not consistent with what you've been saying. And then they try and convince themselves
Oh,
um,
yeah.
why it fits in. But the thing is I think just being honest and calling people on, not negatively, but just calling them and say, you know, this doesn't jive with what you were saying you needed. Is that what you truly need? And then they can answer that question well, then they're being true to themselves. If they can't answer the question well, then they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've certainly had where I've, recommended or a client is asked to see a property and where you say, you told me this and this property is that. Are you sure you still want to see it? And it gives them pause. And sometimes they will say yes because of X, Y, and Z. We talked about it and we've shifted. And that's good information. And sometimes they say, actually, no, you're right. We don't really need to do that. But
Yeah.
but it can be helpful to have those conversations for sure. And that's one thing, when you get asked to show 10 properties, maybe you can narrow it down and focus.
So
And
I
again,
had I had a
yeah.
client we were looking at townhomes, and so we were looking at space. And what we ended up doing was we created a matrix. So what is the space that they wanted? How do they want to live? How close did they want to be to work? One of the criteria were was bike riding and walkability. And so we were comparing and contrasting these townhomes in Langford to Esquimalt. And the price point was slightly higher in Esquimalt, but the walkability and the proximity to work and all of that were there. And that ended up being, like, when we were able to actually give it a score,
Mhm.
that ended up being the place they wanted to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and the score thing can work really well for those people. And I've worked with clients in the past, and it surprised me, but they actually had come up with a gaming system where they had a spreadsheet and they had all of the things they wanted and didn't want. And they were scoring properties based on, is it got an extra bathroom? That's an extra 3 points. Is it near this? It's negative 2 points. And so they would score everything. And it was fascinating, actually, because um, that could be one metric for looking for a home. It's very calculating, and it can also help to remind you of, like, okay, does this match what we're trying to buy? But at the end of the day, that saying, that unfortunate saying that buyers are liars, comes from the source um, that people do buy emotionally, and they sometimes, despite all the things in their head about saying what they want and what they really like to do, they go into a home, fall in love, and suddenly all of that is thrown out the window. And it can be helpful to remind them of what those things are, but it also, if that's what they want, that's what they're gonna buy.
Yeah. And also understanding, as a realtor, you're not the buyer. You may think
Yeah.
they're not buying the right property for them, and just and that's okay. That was a big lesson for me. This is not the right property for you.
It's hard, because we get invested in doing a good job for our clients. And we think doing a good job for our clients is like helping to guide them into the
Protecting them.
right home, protecting them. And sometimes they don't want that protection, don't appreciate that protection, or there are underlying reasons of what they're doing that is not shared with us.
I have a great example. One year, I had 2 clients who wanted to buy on busy roads, and I'm like, listen, like the resale value of this is going to be terrible. And they're
Yeah.
like, if I am on a quiet road and nothing is going by, I am going to go crazy. I spend a lot of time looking out the window. And then I realized I'm not buying the place. Yes, it would drive me crazy, and
Yeah,
probably 99% of people, but there are buyers out there who like a busy road.
for sure. Yeah. And you know what? If you buy it at the right price, a busy road is resellable. If you buy it at the wrong price, it's hard to resell. In the right market, you can sell it any day of the week. In the wrong market, it's hard. These are things that they make the decision around, as long as it's their choice. And so many people say this is going to be my forever home. It never is. But that's their choice.
This
They're
is
not
my
concerned
forever.
about this. They're not concerned about resale.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of resale, let's get into what's happening in the rental department for legislation, because this is going to have some. I mean, there's so many things that have had profound impact on us lately on ownership and on sales, real estate sales. But this is another big one.
Okay, and I'm just going to put the resource for today if people want it. So you can actually subscribe to the BCREA if you want to be kept up to date. Lots of changes. First of all, is the intent of the buyer to use a property. And so previously, if you wanted to use a property and you did not occupy it for 6 months, you had to have an intent in good faith to use it. And I did get a call. I think I mentioned this on another podcast, but I did get a call from a tenant of one of the properties. It's the buyer who determines that they want to use the property. They put it into the contract. They give the listing realtor the forms that say that they intend to use the property, and those are served by the seller. The seller then returns a proof of service to the buyer's realtor. And previously, you had to leave the property vacant for 6 months or occupy it by a family member. And now it's moved to 12 months. And if you do not occupy it, and if it is used other than for what that purpose was supposed to be, then they can claim up to 12 months. So what happened in this case, the buyer purchased a property and then they didn't occupy it for 6 months, and I got a call from the tenant giving me crap, and I was like, the former tenant, and I said, listen, like, it's, if they don't want to use the suite, they don't want to use the suite. Like, that's not in compliance with the act. It is in compliance.
So what you're saying is, if somebody is looking at a home that has an upper and a lower suite, and they want to buy the home and take the whole home back for themselves, even though the downstairs suite was tenanted, they can give notice and the tenant vacates, and then they move into the entire house. Whether they and if they choose not to re-rent it, that's not a problem. They just need to be using it as part of the entire house, because it's now their home. They want to use. They're moving into a 2-bedroom suite up with 3 children. They need to take one of the rooms downstairs for their kids, whatever it is. So that's certainly fine. And but what's happening here is this change from 6 months to 12 months does mean that there's more chance that if and again, it has to be good faith. It can be hard to prove. But when a landlord gives notice, I think given just how much the difference is between some current rents that people are paying, rents that people are historically paying on average and current rents, there can be a business case for someone saying, I want to take it I want to empty it out. I'll leave it empty for 6 months, won't re-rent it. So I'm on board with residential tenancy, and then I can re-rent it at a higher rate, and I will get my money back that I lost over the 6 months quite quickly based on the higher rent. So that I think that's why they're trying to make this a longer period, so that there's not that same incentive.
So it's more onerous on the buyer to leave the suite vacant for a whole year versus just 6 months.
If they intend to re-rent it, yes.
So where this becomes a problem is when the current tenant is renting the property for way less than market value. And so a buyer comes in and they go, you know what? They're only paying $800 a month, and the market value of this is $1,800 a month. We need to increase the rent here. And, even if we left it vacant for 12 months, so let's set $7,200 or whatever. No,
it's $12,000 difference.
$12,000 difference. Yeah. Then we need to leave this vacant for a year.
Yeah.
So what a tenant can do is they can renegotiate their current tenancy. This may be something they want to do, or they just wait and see what the buyer's going to do.
Okay, yeah. So we're not getting yet into the weeds. I guess we are getting into the weeds. We haven't really overviewed all of this, but that is something we're seeing more of. And there's these things called cash for keys, which is happening in a lot more back east, where tenants are saying, I know, I'm familiar with the rules. I know that this home is more valuable without a tenant in place, or at least more valuable without a tenant that's not paying market rent in place. So if you pay me X amount of dollars, I will leave, but only if I'm compensated. And that can be something that makes sense for everyone. There's also, yes, the fact that tenants, and I just was in a situation where we were offered on, we competed and lost. But we offered on a property that had a tenant down below who was paying under market rent, and she was aware that there was a chance somebody could buy the place, give notice, and take the whole space back for their purposes. And rather than having to move, she forecast to the other agent, to the listing agent, to the seller, that she would be interested in discussing a new rental agreement at a higher amount to insulate her against a buyer who was not wanting a tenant. So that would give her more chance of it selling to someone who was happy to take on a tenant. And it's interesting, this whole, how these things all evolve or people work around these things. But, we don't have the right as an owner to increase the rent more than the prescribed amounts. But there is the reality that when a home goes up for sale, there is a chance, unless there is a lease in place, that the tenant could be given notice because of landlord's use of property. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, for me, the main change here in regards to us and doing business. Let's talk about these other ones. But the main change for me is this 4-month instead of 2 months.
We're getting there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay, so if you have a client or a tenant previously, I guess if they were a minor and then they became a major, or they reached age of majority, they were then added to the lease, you could increase the rent. And now you cannot do that. And I didn't know about that former rule, but it makes sense.
I did not either. And I guess it does make sense. I guess the idea is that people should leave the nest once they get a certain age or start paying more rent. And in some ways that actually makes a lot of sense. Let's all, have a system where we're supporting ourselves. But just like if you have kids living at home and they reach a certain age, they can start paying rent.
Yeah, exactly.
To you, the homeowner, the mother and father.
Yeah.
Okay.
This
is big.
Yeah, this is, so now if you're going to evict a tenant as of July 18th, which is in 1 week, you now have to use a web portal, and you have your BCID. You have to log in, and you have to fill out the notice to end tenancy. So you're declaring it publicly, and you have to have either a close family member moving in, or you're the purchaser, or a family member of
No,
the purchaser.
you're not the purchaser, but you're doing it on behalf of a purchaser.
Yes.
Unless you're already the owner. But usually what happens is the purchaser asks the actual owner at the time before it's closed to give the notice.
That's a good question, because, who is making the statement? Legally.
It would be the seller, just as we did before. As was always been, when you have, as you said earlier, you give notice as the buyer to the seller, you intend to occupy the property, and you've incorporated into your original purchase contract the provision that requires them to give that notice. Then the landlord, the actual landlord, gives that notice on behalf, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah. Interesting.
But you're requiring the seller to go to this portal and do that. Now, if the seller is elderly, not very good with technology, and I'm actually curious about how this notice is then transmitted to the tenants, because in the past we had a time gap where, yeah, I know, we had a time gap where if you were to give notice and post it on a door, it wasn't considered given for 3 days. So
I think this is just how it's generated, not how it's delivered.
Okay, so then that adds extra grind and weight. We don't know yet. We haven't seen this portal, but I'm curious to know how it's considered actually given.
I can tell you what's going to happen is a good agent is going to sit with their client and help them through this and figure out how to generate the freaking forms so that we can do the job right.
Yeah, and yet that puts us into our licensing puts us into an area where we're not licensed, because that is property management.
Yeah.
So there's some risks there. Anyway, all kinds of confusion there. The knock on of this is that it's now 4 months notice required instead of 2 months. So you go to the online portal, you make the notice, and now it's 120 days instead of 60 for notice. And what that means is, and that's from the notices, it's always a little confusing for people.
4 clear months.
4 clear months. So if your tenancy renews on the 1st of every month and you're given notice on the 3rd, then the notice is effective from the end of that month, starting for 120 days. So you've got the entire month from the 3rd on that doesn't count in those 4 months.
Right. So this is really important when you're writing a contract for a buyer, is just to make sure that you give the notice at the right time. And you want it to happen at least 3 or 4 days before the end of the month, in case there is a delay in delivery. And then the tenant then now has moved from 15 to 30 days, and then the information will be on the form to dispute this notice. Yeah. And then the person moving in has to occupy that home for 12 months. Otherwise, if they have evicted somebody in bad faith, they have to pay 12 months rent to the displaced tenant.
Yeah. So let's circle back to this. There's a lot of nuances to this, going from 2 months to 4 months.
Yes.
And one of the big ones is the financing, which we don't have Jen here today. But most buyers who are going to purchase a home, they want to buy a home, they want to be able to occupy it for themselves, let's say, and it has tenants in place. They are going to put a lot more thought into whether or not they're going to buy that tenanted home now, because number one, first of all, the longer you have in time between when you've contracted to buy and the closing, there's just room for chaos to happen. And anything can happen in the meantime. It makes it, there's just more room for things to go sideways, whether that's a change in your own job situation as the buyer or a change in the condition of the home and so forth. So most people like to have not that long of a gap between when they've contracted to buy and when they complete. And traditionally, people try to complete and get vacant possession. They don't want to complete with tenants in place. They don't want to have that transition period where they've now moved into a home. They maybe can't even move into that home because the tenants are there and they need that space. So the bank's not going to lend them money for a home until, like, they need to be able to get financing for that home. And most people have a rate lock, which is only good for 120 days.
So now what I'm doing is I'm talking to my clients who are looking at tenanted properties that we need to have 180 days. And I think the banks are going to, banks are going to do that.
I don't know. I mean, that it puts a lot more risk on the banks too, because they're now subject to much more the vagaries of changes in the interest rates.
Well, so I did ask,
or they'll charge more.
Yeah, I did ask a client that. And so then obviously you have to get them to requalify as soon as you write the offer.
Yeah. So the other side of this is if you're a seller and you're required to give the 4 months notice, even with the 2 months notice, the tenant had the right, once they got that notice, to go and look for another place to live. And they can certainly give they can give notice to the landlord and leave. I think it's within 1 month.
10 days.
10 days. So they can just leave. So in the past, you were at risk of losing a couple months rent. Now you're at risk of losing 4 months rent if the tenant decides just to up and leave right away.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
By the way, when they give 10 days notice, you have to pay the balance of the rent for that month back to the tenant.
Right. That's another one that hasn't changed, but yes. So, okay. And we're getting into the weeds on property management, which we're not licensed in. So do have do a deep dive into this stuff if you're considering being a landlord, if you're looking at buying a tenanted property. This is the stuff that we are dealing with from the outside as we are helping people navigate these contracts to purchase. But these are some of the things you'll want to think about based on these changes. And again, as a landlord, now you may be contracting to sell to someone who's asking you to give notice to the tenant. And if you're dependent on that rent from that tenant for paying your mortgage, that tenant could leave and you're at a higher risk of not getting any payment for the next 3 months. Well, waiting 4 months while you're waiting for this property to close.
Yeah. So you know what? One thing I didn't notice if it changed or not was whether or not you give them last month's rent free, or if it's more than that now. I think it's still just 1 month's free.
But they've been silent on that, so that won't have changed.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Just so you know what one real estate company in Ontario is doing is when they, and I don't know if they have I don't know what the rules are there anymore, but what they do is they require a mutual agreement to end tenancy, which is interesting to me, that if the tenant if you give notice, that the tenant has to sign, and if they don't, then the deal doesn't go forward because the buyer is requiring vacant possession.
This is what lawyers, yeah. I've typically written my contract when a buyer is buying and they want to occupy a space that's got tenant in place. I write vacant possession as a term in the contract. And lawyers, at least Peter DeMayo now, is suggesting that is not something that sellers should be accepting in a contract. A buyer wants that, but a seller does not want to have to contract to that, because we know that the tenant has more time to dispute the tenancy. There could be delays. The seller just cannot guarantee vacant possession anymore.
And here's a pro tip for you realtors who are all watching the show, because we know it's mostly realtors watching, is have the possession a few days after the beginning of the month so that the seller has time to clean up the unit. So you don't have to.
Hopefully the seller will do that, and at least you give the seller more time. If you are depending on the tenants to do the cleaning and you get a possession on the first day after they've left, there's no time for anybody to do any fixes at the last minute when they get in and discover that the tenants have left a mess.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Have we covered this topic?
Have we exhausted this topic? I think this topic is a lot of nuance. There's a lot more to it. Certainly, this new government portal allows government now to track and get data on a lot of information about suites in the province. And I don't know if that information is shared federally, but that could also have tax implications for anyone who's just been renting a place for cash. I don't know. But there's a lot going on here with this change that will have some knock-on effects. As always, every change does. I just hope that I just hope that people don't get scared of buying tenanted properties, and we see the opposite effect.
Yeah. So if you guys want, first of all, if you're working with a realtor, just ask them what are the new rules, get them to explain it to you so you understand what your rights are as a purchaser. Also, if you're a tenant, I would also talk to the realtor so you understand what your rights are as a tenant. And then everybody's going to be on the same page. You have an open discussion. Don't forget there's rules around showing and being reasonable. And everybody wants it to work. The ideal situation is that a tenant stays in a property, and we really want, obviously, it to show well for the buyer. So just consider that when you're a tenant. I don't know what else to say. It's just like,
Yeah.
we're all trying to make it work for everybody, you guys.
Tenants that make it difficult can make it more likely that they are, because they're concerned about getting kicked out, make it more likely that they're going to get kicked out. It's self-fulfilling prophecy. Tenants who keep a place clean and are, really cooperative, they're the kind of people that help a buyer who is looking for an investment with little problem feel more comfort moving forward. So you self-select if you're creating problems as a tenant for getting either a problem landlord or getting kicked out because it's only going to be a buyer who is going to buy that home that's going to occupy it for their own purposes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so good.
All right, we are done with that topic. We are on every Thursday morning at 9:30 if you guys want to join us. We'll probably take some time off in August, I'm thinking, because we all need a break from listening to Andrew and myself.
Especially me.
Andrew, how do people get in touch with you, my love?
You can reach me at 250-360-6106 or email me at info@andrewplank.com and the website andrewplank.com. And we also have our new Vibe Real Estate website coming soon. And so, yeah, there you go. Reach out and I'm happy to discuss all things real estate or otherwise life, the universe, and everything.
All right. And if you want to reach me, I'm Jane Johnston. My number is 250-744-0775. My email is briarhillgroup@gmail.com. You can visit my website, which is briarhillgroup.com, and you can meet our new associate, Sean Provencher. If you want to watch these shows and more, go to victoriarealestateshow.com. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at realtyteacher_remax_Victoria or at Briar Hill Group. What the heck? Okay, you guys, so we'll see you next Thursday. If you have a topic that you want us to cover, let us know. Take care and have a great week. Enjoy the sunshine. Bye.
Okay, fine. Bye, everybody.